you're considering getting a Harvest Right freeze dryer or you've already bought one. So now what? Now you have to figure out what you can and cannot freeze dry in your Harvest Right. I know you didn't even think about it, did you? You want to make sure that you keep your freeze dryer in good condition and working properly without damaging it. I mean, come on, let's face it. You just spent quite a good deal of money on this appliance, and that's what it is, an appliance. What are the do's and don'ts of using a Harvest Right freeze dryer? When we got our Harvest Right last year, we were really excited about freeze drying all kinds of fruits and vegetables from our garden. And of course, we also wanted to do a little experimentation. Like, we've all seen those videos of people freeze drying cheesecake and ice cream and candy. What are the foods you can and can't freeze dry? First off, it's a great idea to freeze dry any kinds of fruits and vegetables that you get from your garden. The first rule that I think is important to know is what kind of things do you want to freeze dry together? Think about it this way. What foods do you not mind if they kind of taste similar? Does the food you're freeze drying have a strong taste or smell? It's kind of like being in a car with your husband after his third chili dog at the 4th of July party you just left. You really want to be careful what kind of things you put into your freeze dryer, and you want to make sure the different foods that you're putting in the freeze dryer mesh well together. God knows you don't want your nectarines tasting like onions. I mean, maybe you do. Who knows? The point is, if you think a food has a strong taste or smell, just kind of keep in mind that it's going to commingle with the other foods in your freeze dryer. Also, your freeze dryer will kind of pick up that odor. Good rule of thumb is after you freeze dried something with a strong odor or smell, you can always deodorize your freeze dryer by using a little bit of vinegar and lemon juice and water spray, and just kind of spray it inside and clean it out. Clean your tray racks really well too. So that's my first tip. Be careful what you mix in your freeze dryer. Tip number 2 is also be aware that certain foods do not freeze dry well in a Harvest Right. They may freeze dry in a commercial or industrial type setting, like we've all seen butter powder and honey powder, but a home freeze dryer doesn't have the capabilities that some of those machines have. So it's best not to freeze dry things with high fat. So yes, put that peanut butter down. It's not going to freeze dry. And no, leave the chocolate doesn't freeze dry either, unfortunately. Yes, and honey is a big no-no. It also does not freeze dry well. After you bring it out of the freeze dryer from the process, it just kind of recongeals. And that also means butter. Butter does not freeze dry well. Trust me, you don't want to do it. You will end up with butter all over the inside of your freeze dryer. And unfortunately, that also means that some foods don't quite freeze dry as well as others because they have a higher fat content. What you want to do with those foods, like if you were to make, say, sausage crumbles, is make sure that you cook the food first and drain it of as much oil as possible, and also pat it with some paper towels to remove any residual fat, or it just won't freeze dry as well. Another tip, make sure when you're freeze drying meats, you either do it in shreds, cubes, smaller pieces, or thin slices, and try to remove as much of the extra fat as possible. It just works better and it will keep your freeze dryer in better working condition. So these are the types of things you have to think about. Tip number 3 when you're freeze drying is certain fruits and vegetables have a thin skin, and it makes it really difficult for a freeze dryer to pull the water out of it, because that's basically what a freeze dryer does with sublimation. Like I personally experienced, and you've seen in one of my videos, my blueberries didn't freeze dry quite as well as the other fruits in my batch. You either have to give them a longer freeze drying time. Always make sure that you slice your fruits, even grapes. You want to make sure that the freeze dryer can do its job. With blueberries, they recommend kind of piercing the skin in a way. Some people found that if you put them into like a blender for just a second, it pierces the skin enough that it makes it easier to freeze dry. Some of the other obvious tips that you need to make sure you're doing with your Harvest Right is read your manual before doing your first batch. You always want to make sure that you're running your Harvest Right freeze dryer the way that the manufacturer recommends. If you don't, your Harvest Right probably won't last as long. My fourth tip is to make sure that you always check your oil levels if you have an oil pump, and make sure that the oil isn't cloudy or has any little floaty bits or residue in it. If it does, it's time to change that oil. If you follow some of these tips, you are going to have successful batches and you will be able to use your Harvest Right for a very long time. If you're looking for even more tips, I hope to get a blog post coming up this week on our new blog. Yes, if you've noticed, our brand has changed. We rebranded and now our blog and YouTube channel is called Thriving Through It All. If you watched our video about our move, I discussed the fact that we wanted to do more self-reliant living type videos and blog posts. So this is what we've done. Thriving Through It All is going to be all about self-reliant living, meaning freeze-dry videos, home cooking from scratch, homesteading videos, everything that you need to learn about self-reliant living. If you like this video and you want to see more of this type of content, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you do know when I upload another video. And I hope to see you guys soon. So one of the things that the good news is in our Brita. The good that you keep. So cheesy. I swear.